people who haven't got back to us because they're so very important and doing such very important things that they can't possibly help to save someone.
Of course.
The Thompson twins were one, Phil Oakey was another, and Sade's manager was another.
That's a shame, because I'm sure she would...
I don't think we'll miss any of them.
Hello once again, it's Matthew here from Matthew North Music. Thank you for watching my latest video. And as ever, if you like the type of videos I make, be them about music or electronics or whatever, please hit the subscribe button because it really does help the channel. It's completely free. And while you hit subscribe, if you click the little bell icon, then you'll be notified next time there's a new video. Now, today, it's pretty obvious from the title what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this, the Band-Aid single, Do They Know It's Christmas? That's the 7-inch, and that's the sleeve for the 12-inch. Now, this record, the bulk of the recording was done 40 years ago tomorrow as I do this video. I'm doing this video on the Sunday, and on Monday the 25th is the anniversary of the recording of this record. Now, I've talked a lot on this series about 1984 being the greatest year of pop music, and I think a bit like the story of the Beatles, 1984 had a beginning, a middle and an end. And the beginning was Frankie Goes to Hollywood's Relax getting to #1. The middle, you could say, was Frankie's Two Tribes, or a host of other brilliant records that came out. But the pinnacle of the year has to be this record being made. Now, it's something everybody remembers. Everyone remembers going into school on that Monday morning, having seen the news talking about this record coming out, because nobody knew it was happening until that day. There was news reports on TV, it was mentioned on the radio. I think Richard Skinner mentioned about it on the Top 40. And the next day, the video, I think the video came out the next day, but the news reports were out. And I think it was played on the Radio 1 breakfast show. They literally just got a mix of it on a tape, and Geldof was down there after spending all night mixing the track. And it got into the shops a few days later and obviously went to #1, and the rest, they say, is history. But there's so many aspects to the story of this record, and the thing I kind of think about all these 1984 things that I've been doing is, most of the people that appear on this record were completely unknown 4 or 5 years earlier. And we're talking roughly the same time span as between now and the start of the COVID pandemic. That period of time is the same amount of time that, you know, nobody knew who U2 were really. They were around, but they weren't very big. Paul Young hadn't established himself as a solo artist by that point. Neither had Heaven 17. They had been part of the Human League, but again, they weren't big pop stars. Duran Duran, Spandau Ballet, neither of them were known at the beginning of 1980. The people that were known, Francis Rossi and Rick Parfitt. Obviously, Geldof was known, but then Geldof was very much a 70s name, and I think Banana Republic and Mondo Bongo was the last record that the Boomtown Rats that had was, you know, any kind of hit. And so for him to do this record, I think in a way had a bit more credence, because he was a one-time pop star who was an established name. But there's so many aspects to this record, and one of them is just the ages of people, because when this was being recorded, I remember some of the artists on here were considered to be, you know, the new pop stars of this world, and we're talking about people like, you know, Duran Duran, Boy George, Paul Young, even Midge Ure, who had been around for a little while. But if you look at their ages, and this is put into context, so Bono was 24, Sting was 33, as was Phil Collins. They were both 33. Now that is the same age that Ed Sheeran is now. But at the time, Phil Collins was seen as an old bloke, and Ed Sheeran is still seen now as a young pop star. And so yeah, Simon Le Bon was 26. Midge Ure said was 31. Paul Weller was 26. Tony Hadley was 24. So they're all they're all fairly young. But then Taylor Swift is now 34. So again, age was quite a big thing back then. And kind of if you're over 30, you were all almost thought of as being sort of past it. I mean, even Francis Rossi, he was, I think he was about 35, I think. And he was seen as like, the oldest of the lot. Yeah, anyway, so they made this record. Now, a lot of people have poo-pooed it and they've said, oh no, it's Bob Geldof just trying to relaunch his career. Well, it wasn't that, because if it was that, he would have, if he just wanted to do something to publicise himself, he would have come up with some other idea. But he didn't. And this really gave birth, I think, to the big charity, big giving. And I think things that we have now, like when there's like a tsunami or something and you've got the Disasters Emergency Committee or whatever they're called that do the big fundraising and stuff, all that is based on Band-Aid. Obviously charities like Comic Relief, they're kind of based on Band-Aid. But it made young people particularly interested in fundraising and raising money and being charitable, and I think that's a great thing, because other than things like the Blue Peter appeal, which we all used to do, bring and buy sales and things as a kid, because obviously I was 12, 13 when this came out, people just didn't really contribute to charity. So, and the fact this record sold in huge amounts, and a lot of what it was raising money for was actioned, fairly quickly, just showed how powerful pop music was back in 1984. And then obviously, I kind of think this was the pinnacle of 1984, but really the pinnacle of 1984 came a year later, and that was the Live Aid concert, because I think that was the peak of all these artists' careers was on that day. And I think music changed rapidly. I mean, even if this record had come out a year later, who would you have had on it? You probably would still have had George Michael, and you might not have had Duran Duran, because they were on the verge of splitting up at the end of 85. But you would have probably maybe had the Pet Shop Boys, you might have had a-ha, maybe Dead or Alive. The music was changing all the time. And a lot of these artists, they kind of weren't, they kind of disappeared for a little while. But saying that, pretty much everyone that played on this record, they had a career for the rest of their lives. I mean, Midge Ure's on tour at the moment. Status Quo, they just they stopped touring when this record came out, and then what did they do? They made another album and they went back on the road for the next 40 years. All right, down to health problems, but Phil Collins can't perform anymore. But Genesis, I saw them a couple of years ago. Sting, I've seen this year. Culture Club are on tour. Bananarama are always on tour. It's just a great testament to pop music. I think that's what my main kind of thought is. It's like the Beatles doing their rooftop concert as their sort of pinnacle. I think the making of the Band-Aid record was the pinnacle of 84. And so we've got this anniversary coming up. There's going to be a documentary on it on BBC TV this week, on BBC4, I think. So it'll be on the iPlayer as well. And they're doing a special repress of the single with a new mix made up from all the other versions, because you had the second Band-Aid single called Band-Aid 20, Then they did a Band-Aid 30, which I have to admit, it completely passed me by. I had no idea that took place until I was reading about it the other day. And of course there was another Band-Aid single, the Band-Aid 2 single, which was put together by Stock Aitken and Waterman. And it's interesting that that's not really thought of as part of the canon of the Band-Aid releases, but you know, Geldof handed it over to them and said, you know, it's your turn now to do it. I think that came out in about 1989, I think. So it was like, you know, 5 years after this one. So maybe it should have been called Band-Aid 5, really, rather than Band-Aid 2. So anyway, I just thought I'd just rattle on about this subject because, you know, it was just a big event. It was a massive event, and I don't think pop music has that power anymore. I don't think any pop star could do something or create something that would have, you know, everybody the next day talking about it. I mean, you know, even the phenomena of, you know, Ed Sheeran and Taylor Swift and people. I mean, if Ed Sheeran, Taylor Swift and one or two of the other big names decided to make a record together, I don't think people would be that bothered. I mean, I don't think it would even make the news. Whereas Band-Aid made all the front pages of the papers. It was on every news outlet was talking about it. Obviously, the Tube made a documentary about it, as did Whistle Test, and it just became an iconic cultural event. And it was all filmed, and it all happened on that day. Now, obviously, I'm not going to talk about anything more now about this because there's not a lot more to be said because we all kind of know about it, really. But I just wanted to really mark the day about this, you know, very special record. And, you know, 40 years on, I played it just now, and I played the 12-inch mix as well. The 12-inch mix was interesting because it's got a whole loop of drumming in the middle with, you know, voiceovers and things. And I never noticed that there is actually an In the Air Tonight fill-in in part of it, which was I've never noticed before. But you know, the 12-inch mix isn't great. It is something you listen to once, but you know, the proper single, it's just a great moment in time, I think. And you know, it's still raising money to this day, and you know, who knows, it might become the Christmas #1 this year. Maybe if it does, I think that would be a good thing. Anyway, thanks for watching the video. I'll catch you on the next one.